It's Holy Week, and Christians around the world are uniting in celebrating this most sacred of Christian holidays. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. So, Easter, Holy Week, Passover, you're familiar with it. But how much do you know about the true reasons for the season, right? You know it's not about Easter bunnies and eggs, but do you know the difference between celebrating on Easter, celebrating Passover, celebrating the Jewish Seder, celebrating the entire Holy Week? What is Easter? What does it mean? Definition Church is the website I'm on, and they have a quick summary. Just thought, for those out there who may be Christian and don't understand the significance of the entire week celebrations, or if you're not a Christian and tuning in and curious about what Easter and Holy Week is all about, they've got some good rundowns, some good bullet points on this particular website. Before I get into more of that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at washingtontimes.com, where you may also subscribe to my Bold and Blunt newsletter. Just enter your email address on the newsletter section under Bold and Blunt with Cheryl Chumley, and you'll be signed up. You'll get delivered to your email box Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. My Bold and Blunt newsletter, it has my commentaries and my podcasts that I write and record all week long at the Washington Times. If you don't want to do all that, well, you can get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are available. And I want to quickly mention, because it does tie into this religious week, specifically the importance of God in government in America, my new book, God Given or Bust, Defeating Marxism and Saving America with Biblical Truths. I don't talk about Easter or Holy Week in this book, but keeping God alive in America, very, very crucial to our nation's freedoms. What is Easter? Definition Church asks. What does it mean? The Easter celebration is a bit of a strange holiday. Is it about bunnies and eggs? Is it pagan or Christian or Jewish? And why does the date move? Why does the date of Easter move each year, sort of like Thanksgiving, right? So here is a quick rundown of Holy Week, right? The history of Easter. What is Easter? Easter is a Christian holiday celebrating the day Jesus returned from the dead after being killed. So why does the date of Easter move? And where did the eggs and bunnies come from? This is interesting. In early Christianity, the Christian church moved the celebration of Easter to coincide with an existing pagan festival on the first full moon after the spring equinox, which is why Easter moves every year. In old pagan customs, eggs were a symbol of new life, and rabbits a symbol of fertility. These so-called Easter eggs became ways for Christians to talk about the resurrection, or when Jesus came back to life, that Christians celebrated the season for. So you can still use the eggs, right, as a sort of in to talking about the real reason for the season. How is Easter connected to the Jewish Passover celebration? For those people who read their Bible, you already know this. You know what's going on here. You know the story. You know when the Israelites were saved by God from death, when they marked their doors with blood, specifically the blood of a sacrificial lamb. And in so doing, they saved their households, right? This is when the Israelites were slaves to the Egyptians. let my people go. Pharaoh, Pharaoh, let my people go. And Pharaoh kept having his heart hardened by, if you read the Bible, God. God actually played with Pharaoh, made a fool of him, and hardened his heart so he would not let the Jewish people go. And so God, in turn, could send yet another plague as punishment against Pharaoh and the Egyptian people. So the Jews were told to mark their doors with the blood of a lamb, and thus the angel of death the Lord sent would pass over their homes and not kill anyone inside, not kill the firstborn sons inside. Good story, right? It's in Exodus. It's in Exodus, 12. I'm taking a guess here. Exodus 12, I think you can look at if you want to read the full story. But this is what Definition Church says. How is Easter connected to the Jewish Passover celebration? For Jewish people, Passover is a week of celebration that ends with a feast to remember God bringing them out of slavery in Egypt. Jesus had building tensions with Jewish leaders during his life, which culminated in his death on the day of Passover. Because many Jews became Christians following Jesus' death and resurrection, some Jewish traditions became part of the Christian observance of Easter. And finally, so what is Holy Week? Definition Church asks and then answers. The timing of Jesus' death is historically significant. Many ancient Jewish prophecies were fulfilled in the days leading up to Jesus' death. And the week leading up to his death chronicles the climax of long building tensions between Jesus and Jewish leaders, known as Holy Week. The week before Easter is a time of remembering the historical events that took place in Jerusalem and set the stage for the birth of Christianity. And of course, as you probably are aware, Easter, or Resurrection Sunday, celebrates the rise of Jesus from the dead, right? It was the third day of his burial following his crucifixion, when the stone was rolled back and his body was revealed to have been removed. And then, of course, it was the spirit of Jesus who first appeared to Mary, and then she went and she told other disciples. So we celebrate Easter, right? The resurrection of Jesus Christ. Christians around the world celebrate this oh so holy week. And nowhere else, perhaps in Rome, in Vatican City, do the masses assemble to hear what the Pope has to say for his customary Easter deliverance. They have a Catholic term for it, but it's basically his Easter message. This year is a little bit different. The Pope has been sick. He's been feeling under the weather. He's ill. And whether you're Catholic or not, I'm not, just to put that out there, but whether you're Catholic or not, you have to recognize that what the Pope does, what Pope Francis does or doesn't do or says or doesn't say, has influence around the world. He, to those of the Catholic Church, to many in the Christian faith, is the spiritual leader on earth, the spokesperson for God in some people's belief systems. And even if you don't believe that, you have to recognize both in the spiritual world, in the religious world, and with this Pope in particular, in the political world, what he says matters, what he says resonates. And this is why my guest today is such a fantastic guest. He is the premier force of media coverage for all things Vatican City, all things Catholic Church, all things Pope Francis. Raymond Arroyo, you know him from Fox News, you know him from EWTN, you know him from his best-selling books, you just know him from speeches around the nation. And he travels back and forth from Rome to America and America back to Vatican City, reporting on things of pertinence and importance to the Catholic Church, to the Pope, and to all things Catholic in general, to the Catholic community in general. And I'm so happy that he's here today of this holiest of holy weeks to talk about Pope Francis, what's going on in Vatican City, what's going on with this Pope, and whether or not this Pope really delves too deeply into politics, as many, especially in America, accuse. Raymond, I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. So great to have you here.
Oh, Cheryl, my pleasure. I'm delighted to be with you.
So let's talk about the Pope. First off, tell listeners a little bit of your background covering the Vatican, covering the Pope, and so forth. And then just tell me what's going on with Holy Week.
Yeah, well, first of all, I've been covering the papacy really for almost 30 years as part of my EWTN responsibilities. EWTN is a Catholic network founded by Mother Angelica. I started the news division for her about 30 years ago, and I have anchored more papal events than just about anybody in the industry, probably anybody at all, because every live papal event through the papacies of John Paul II, Benedict XVI, 15th, and then, of course, Pope Francis. I anchored a lot of those and spent a lot of time covering the Vatican and the mechanism that surrounds the Pope. I mean, he is, and people often forget this, it is the last fully autonomous sovereign monarchy in Europe. That would be the Pope. He is a sovereign monarch. He's the lawmaker. He's the lawgiver. He's the enforcer. Anything that happens within the walls of the Vatican city-state are completely up to him. They have a full diplomatic service. So it's a very robust and interesting kind of, 2,000-year-old institution to cover. And that doesn't mean it's immune from human failings, as we all know. I mean, the sex abuse crisis has taken a toll. They've had financial scandals that have, really shaken, I would say, the foundations of the Vatican in many ways. And now Pope Francis, who had this health scare, double pneumonia, he was hospitalized for more than a month. Now he's back at the Vatican, but again, he's there remember I said earlier, he is the last sovereign monarch. That's good and that's bad. It's bad in the sense that depending on his proclivities, he can change everything from where he lives to where he eats to how much of the schedule he takes part in. And Pope Francis is kind of a workaholic. He likes to be seen. He likes to be seen in public. So I think he probably pushed himself too hard, got double pneumonia, and now he's pushing himself back on the world scene, making a series of surprise appearances at liturgies and things people never imagined they'd see him at, including recently being wheeled out with a oxygen tank attached. So, I mean, but to me, it underscores his frailty. But I think to he and those around him, they see this as a symbol of we're still here, we're still in control, no need to fear or worry.
I want to go back to something you said when you were first speaking, describing the Pope's duties, and you used the word enforcer, which sort of sounds shocking when you're talking about a religious figure.
Well, that is part of, look, Peter, remember, in the Catholic conception, and it's historic, Catholics maintain that the chain of men running from Pope Francis goes straight back to the Apostle Peter, the first Pope. And he was the first among equals. He was the first who, settled disputes. That's in the scripture. And we have the letters of Linus and Clement, all of those who followed, St. Peter. They were clearly the ones that the other bishops deferred to. So in many ways, when there was a doctrinal difference, when there was, a heresy in the church, it was up to the Pope to sort of look at it, examine it, have a conversation about it, and then make a ruling and stamp it out. And so, yeah, in some ways, he is still the enforcer and the lawgiver, and that's a difficult balancing act, I think, because, part of what I think draws people to Catholicism, we see this explosion of young men, Cheryl, particularly in Europe and in the United States, the numbers of conversion among young men to the Catholic Church is really extraordinary. And people are like, what's this? I know what it is. They're yearning for orthodoxy. They're yearning for something permanent and solid that they can tether their lives to. And they're looking for something that is unchangeable in a chaotic world. And so long as Pope Francis, and whoever the Pope is, points to what is eternal and lasting and says, this is the truth, this is what we've always taught, historically and otherwise, when they do that, they're on solid ground. Many times Pope Francis has stretched the boundaries, though, trying to accommodate the world, whether that be blessing of gay unions or some of his environmental fixations on climate change. The more he does that, the more I think he turns off the natural audience, if you will, for his faith and his religion. So it's a balancing act that the Pope always maintains. But yeah, enforcement is part of the deal. Catholicism has to be attached to the doctrine of faith, or it's nothing. It's a do-it-yourself religion, and that it cannot be.
I think in America, particularly under Donald Trump, many conservatives have been very turned off by this Pope's statements on border issues, particularly when you notice the walls that surround the Vatican City.
A lot of people have pointed that out. Cheryl, I mean, here you have a guy living in, 40-foot medieval, a 40-foot medieval fortress with its own escape hatch. There's actually a long wall that runs all the way to the like a fortress at the other end near the Tiber. That's still there, So all of that's all true. I mean, but so there is some, seeming hypocrisy when the Pope says, we need to tear down walls and build bridges, which he's famously said about Trump's wall, when the Pope lives within a wall. And by the way, he has, 24-hour security and a guy, Swiss guardsman that literally stands outside his door every night. So, I see the conflict there. Here's the other problem. The part of this is the church was, as we've discovered, Catholic charities and Catholic relief services. The bishops had an entire office dedicated to refugee resettlement. Well, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars a year, if not $1 billion plus nationally, that the Catholic Church just in America was taking from the federal government in the form of grants. And it was a way for the government to wash what I think is really activity beyond its scope, which is the resettlement of foreign immigrants who are not citizens into the mainland of the United States. They didn't want to be seen doing that, so they basically offshored the job to Catholic charities, Lutheran charities. Now, as a result of the Trump cutbacks, they've had to let go of 50% of their staff, and they've closed a lot of those offices. But I would argue that, if the church is in the salvation business, why are we in the refugee and resettlement racket? I don't know. I don't understand that. But I do think that explains some of the Pope's vociferous and continued critique of Trump's approach here, and the bishops as well, because it may not have been what was keeping them afloat, but it was certainly a large federal grant that sustained a big chunk of the institution itself and the bureaucracy of that institution.
So you said you've been covering this matter for about 30 years now. So I imagine that you know it as best anybody does living today. Are there things about the Catholic Church in general, or this particular Pope specifically, that are disillusionment to you, and that you think is sort of separating the faithful from the church?
Well, look, I think Providence and time have a way of moving the church where it's supposed to go, and we see that. Look, this is the church. This is the church of the saints. This is the church of John Paul II and Pius XII, who stood aboard, and defied fascism and Nazism. This is in many ways, it's a glorious history. In other ways, this is also the church of the Borgias and
Yes.
who were debauched, murderers. But I'll tell you something about them, and this is interesting when you look at the history coldly, cleanly. You look at something like the Borgias. Okay, yes, they killed their own children. Yes, they, illegally propped children up and made them popes, okay, to remain in power. However, these were also the people that commissioned Michelangelo and Caravaggio and gave us some of the greatest art that we still revel in today and worship in today. So even out of darkness, God can bring good. And the fact is, their memory is all but washed away, except, to be the butt of jokes and get kind of scandal. But the good ends up prevailing. And that's how I feel about all of this. If you look at, I always look at young people. Young people will inevitably tell you, if you don't have young people in your ranks, Cheryl, in a church, no matter what that church is, that's a dying church. And if you do have young people in the ranks, they will give you an indication of where you're headed. And I am emboldened and thrilled by what I see from them. Look, Pope Francis is a child of the 60s. This is, I would argue, the last gasp of the kind of 1970s guitar strumming, banner hanging, kumbaya Catholicism. And look, he's said some very good things about life, about marriage, but then he said some very confusing and conflicted things that have rattled people. But on the main, popes come and go. The people stay. And if you look at the quality of the people you have and where they're worshiping and the way they're worshiping, young people want the old Latin Mass. Young people are praying the Rosary and doing pilgrimages in Spain. Young people are going out of their way to find partners young in life and build families early. Those are all fantastic markers for the Catholic Church and any faith, frankly, that has that kind of vibrancy. And it's rooted to something that's real and lasting. Look, there are things I look at Pope Francis, some of the things he says or does, and you do wonder, and I've asked publicly, where is this in Catholic teaching? Where does this come from? The whole synodal church that he's opened up, where lay people and bishops come together and kind of have an open dialogue about things like doctrine and practice, and then they take a vote. Well, where is this in the history of Catholicism? First, it doesn't exist. You had synods of bishops coming together, and then the Pope made a decision. Now it sounds like a parliamentary government or a synod that you'd find in Episcopalianism or Anglicanism or Lutheranism. That's not Catholic. It's just not within the Catholic ethos or history. So those are things that are going to have to be hashed out by bishops. They're going to have to figure this out. But you have to, I think, look beyond all of that at what's actually happening in reality, as opposed to what people or even a pope would like to see happen. Those are sometimes two different things.
Historically speaking, have all popes or the majority of popes waded into the political sphere, into the political arena? I've heard Pope Francis likened to a Marxist because of his political values. I don't know if that's fair or not. You can weigh in on that. But historically speaking, do most popes delve into politics?
Well, I mean, popes have had to deal with politics. Remember, there were papal states. He ended up in the Vatican City, by the way, the Vatican City state, which is just a few acres, of land in the middle of Rome. He ended up there because there were papal states all over the world that the Pope, controlled. So he was a monarch, which is why he was regarded at all by the Spanish and the English and the French at the time, because he was a monarch as they were. So there were lands and armies and people you had to contend with that were under his protection. Well, after the Lateran Accords in the 1800s, late 1800s, he accepted this reduced footprint, if you will, gave up those papal states, though he still has tons of church territory around the world, extraterrestrial territory they call them. But he's confined, the Pope himself, to that Vatican City state in Rome. But yeah, the popes have always had to deal with politicians and whoever was in charge. But hopefully they don't become politicians, okay? So, I mean, there's a reason there's a diplomatic 24-hour hundreds of people to the Pope's diplomacy. There's an actual diplomatic service that the Vatican runs. There's a nuncio in every major country. We have a nuncio in Washington, D.C. There's a nuncio in Madrid. There's a nuncio in every country in South America. Those are the Pope's representatives. So, yes, he engages with these governments, sometimes in active ways, sometimes in passive ways. But I think the best way for that to happen is to focus on the spiritual matter and the souls at play. And it worries me when you have diplomats at the Vatican, and you do, who've signed this, what I see as a demonic China Accord, which is a secret agreement they signed about 8 years ago with China, that allows the Chinese to not only have a hand in bishops, but basically gives them control over the Catholic faithful and what they hear in the pulpit every Sunday. Which now, Cheryl, if you and I went to China, I see the reports, and I've seen it, I've seen the perverted scriptures. They've actually inserted Xi and the Communist Party into the scripture stories. They've changed the ending of stories like Jesus goes to, stops the stoning of the woman, when the Pharisees come up and he stops the stoning, yep. And he writes in the sand. Well, after he exposes all the Pharisees, Jesus picks up the stone and stones the woman himself. That's what happens in the Chinese version of the story. Wow. Because then they say, see, Jesus is like the state. Jesus is like, gee, sometimes for the good of the whole, you have to execute people.
Wow.
So it's like they've really perverted the gospel, and to do that with the blessing or even the passive permission of the Pope and the Vatican, to me, is just insidious. I was just reading before we got on this call. There was an underground bishop. This is a bishop who's been loyal to Rome for years. He's been doing secret masses and secret confirmations and baptisms. They put him under house arrest because it's Holy Week, and they don't want him out preaching to the people in the rural countryside. This is an open persecution of the faithful that the Vatican and the world look away from. Wow. And I think clearly someone's getting something for this agreement, and someone's bought the silence of the Vatican. And that is insidious and should not be going on. That's where they have gotten involved in politics in the wrong way. John Paul II, when he and Reagan shared resources, and he opened up the Solidarity movement in Poland to Reagan just for informational exchanges, that was a positive engagement of I think, politics, because the end was the liberation and the freedom and the free practice of religion for those people, Cheryl. But that's not what's happening in China.
Yeah.
That's not what's happening in other parts of the world. And I worry the Vatican's voice has been bought. And that's a real problem.
And very dangerous development. And
you bet.
Raymond, just to finish up with this last question, you wear a ton of hats, right? So do you have any? What's the latest? Just you want people to know? Do you have another book coming out? Anything going on?
Well, I'm working on a new picture book, but I'll tell you about that later. But I have a new Arroyo Grande podcast, which
I saw.
iHeart distributes. It's on YouTube. And you can go to Arroyo Grande Show on YouTube. And look, I interview incredible culture makers, and the purpose of the show really is to unearth those life lessons and those examples that we all can live by. And I call the show Arroyo Grande not because of my name, but because an arroyo is a dry gully, if you will. And the point is, why do you want to live a dry trickle of a life when you can live a broad, thriving Arroyo Grande? Arroyo Grande is a big, wide river. So it's the rivers of life. It's the waters of life. And that's what we all, I think, desire, want, and it's been great. I just interviewed David Mamet, and I have Jim Caviezel on Holy Week talking about his role, and he's going to be taking up the sandals again, playing Jesus in the new Mel Gibson sequel to The Passion of the Christ. So it's been great. It's been an amazing and fun ride, and I think people are enjoying it, and that's been a blast for me, in addition to my work at Talks and EWTN.
Yeah, I saw your podcast, and I can't wait to tune into your interview with Jim. That's going to be great. Look, it was so fascinating discussing this with you. I hope you come back and we can discuss more goings on in the Catholic Church and the Vatican and everything. And in the meanwhile, I wish you a very happy Easter, and thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Cheryl. It's my pleasure. I love what you do, and we'll definitely come back. My guess is, Pope Francis is pushing it hard. So my guess is, there will be a conclave before long, and that will open up a lot of these conversations of what's next for the Church. And I know many cardinals in Rome are already having those conversations.
Oh, fascinating. Great. All right. Thank you so much, Raymond. You have a great day.
You too, my friend.
Raymond Arroyo is the website, RaymondarRoyo. Check it out. Check out all his offerings. He is a fascinating figure. I want to thank you for listening. I want to remind you, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, and wherever podcasts are available. Tune in next time. In the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.